Hi, welcome to Fostering Abundance. I'm Avi Bar-Zeev. I'm president of the XR Guild and also CTO of my consulting company, Reality Prime. The question I want to ask today is, what does Web3 have to do with Star Trek and Monopoly? It's very interesting. Let's start with Monopoly. As maybe you heard, it was invented by Clarence Darrow. In the game, one misstep and you could go to jail, unless you happen to have the get out of jail free card. You also collected $200 every time you passed go, which oddly is very non-Monopoly. It's sort of a universal basic income. Well, anyway, it sold 275 million copies as of 2015 and earns billions of dollars for Hasbro. But that's not where the game came from. Some of you may know Elizabeth J. Maggie actually invented the game around 1904. She created a game called the Landlord's Game, and it had two sets of rules. One was the monopolist set of rules that you more or less know today. The second was the anti-monopolist rules, where wealth creation wins, where it's more about going around and creating things. Later she pulled a stunt where she put herself up for sale, got quite a lot of attention. And she was an advocate of Henry Georgism, and we'll get back to this in a little while. She patented her design first, and she wanted it to be shared widely to teach people about the anti-monopolist possibilities. Clarence Darrow came along and repatented it, inserting some modifications from the Quaker version of the game, which was available, widespread. But then he sold that to Parker Brothers. And Parker Brothers eventually realized that they had a problem, and they offered her $500 for her rights to the game. They also promised her that they would agree to distribute her rule set, the anti-monopolist rules. But how many of you have ever seen the anti-monopolist rules? So you know what happened. A lot of this is documented in the book, The Monopolists. So what's important to our conversation right now is that what she was engaging with is a form of simulation. Gameplay is a form of simulation where people are involved and they follow rules, and we see what the outcomes of those rules are. All simulations let us try things that are risky or hard to do in real life, and they all let us validate the models against reality so we can learn something from a simulation. And it's very, very widely used today. So she's not just a game designer, but you can think of her as an early inventor of simulations. And simulation was economic in this case. But simulations are also used in aviation, flight simulators, in medicine, to look at virtual bodies, and autonomy for cars, so that you don't have to drive on the streets and potentially hurt people. You could try these things virtually and learn virtually, geology, chemistry. It's used just about everywhere today, and it's incredibly valuable. So she was a pioneer of this field. Second Life is another kind of simulation with millions of players in the game. It's not quite a game, it's simulating a form of real life. There's some interesting facts that come from the company about Second Life as an example of metaverses that actually did pretty well for their day. Maybe it was limited in total capacity, but it earned more per user than Facebook. That's pretty interesting. The company made more money per user on average than Facebook does. And at least 50% of the users were also creators. That was unprecedented. It's usually only 10% or less are creators. And the average creator earned more as well than you would on Roblox or YouTube today. That's amazing, right? It also had, before NFTs, it had a model of digital content rights that was pretty permissive and allowed people to mash up other people's content with permission. The land use model resembled what we'll talk about the Georgist as well. And importantly, it maintained a very stable digital currency called Linden dollars, which was at a very stable rate to the US dollar. And it didn't include all the fraud. It had actual economists, and they policed it. And they made sure that the economy was useful. It was actually a currency that you could buy and sell things with. That's very important for any kind of currency. So Philip Rosedale was the founder of Second Life. Very interesting guy, glad to know him. And if you read his Substack, he had an article, Why Did the Rich Get Richer? And I found this very fascinating. I didn't really understand this before, but he helped explain it to me, and I'm going to try to help explain it to you, with props to Philip. And Philip also got a lot of his information from a Scientific American article, which got its information from some economists who did these simulations. So I'm going to show you a dramatization of what's on Philip's site. If you're interested in this more, go to his site, run the actual simulation in your browser, and you can play with it. But my goal is just to help explain it here. So let's start with a bunch of virtual people, A through N. Each person starts with an equal amount of wealth or land represented by circle size. And what we're going to do in the simulation is allow them to meet up 2 at a time. And each time they do, there's a 50-50 chance of gain or loss. One of them is going to win a little bit, one of them is going to lose the same amount for each pair. But the amount for the pair is random. So after the first round, half of the circles are bigger and half are smaller. Repeat, repeat, repeat. The important thing to understand is that these bets are limited by the wealth of the poorer of each pair. Okay, the poorer only has so much money to bet, and so the richer one can only bet that same amount. That's incredibly important. It seemed fair at first, right? But watch what happens. The poorer one is always risking a greater percentage of their wealth, while the richer ones are risking a lower percentage of their wealth, but they can also better absorb the losses. So poorer circles need to win many more times to get rich. Meanwhile, the rich ones can lose many times and still remain rich. Sometimes the poorer circle wins a lot in a row, and they can move up pretty fast. There's your upward mobility right there. But a big loss can send anyone back down real fast. So it may only be temporary. What we've seen is in this very simple simulations, without any skill, prejudice, or bias, one circle always dominates. Maybe a few get big, but there's always the biggest. That's the game of Monopoly in a nutshell. And there's a link down at the bottom to Philip's simulation if you want to run it live. So now, that's the simulation. Let's talk about reality. In reality, we have this thing like gravity, where the bigger you are, the more mass you have, the more you can attract people to your wealth that they want. So there's a sort of warping of space and time, figuratively, where wealth accumulates even more because you're warping the playing field to your advantage. The rich claim superiority and the poor struggle to keep their wealth and power. We add legalized discrimination, as we see in this and other countries, regressive taxes, prejudice laws, codified exclusion, and it can get so bad that people's civil rights can be stripped and are, and people can be treated like property and are, and people can be enslaved and are. So that's what happens based on these rules. So Elizabeth J. Maggie, remember, was born in 1866 to abolitionists right after the Civil War. Imagine the environment 11 months after the cessation of hostilities. She must have been conceived just months after the cessation of hostilities. She put herself up for sale as a stunt. So ownership is a big issue for her. The Georgists believe that you own what you make, but we should abolish the ownership of the commons like land. No more land ownership. Instead, the land is all of ours, and there's a single tax. If you want to use a piece of land, you can use it, but you pay a tax for that use. And if you make money off the land, that's how you pay the tax. So anybody who successfully uses land will be a successful part of our economy. But it really focuses on creation, on people who are creating new value, not just reusing the existing value. The Georgists didn't win back in the 1800s, and we live with this system of free market capitalism. But even free market capitalism, the way we run it with all this ownership, we still need the Fed to set monetary policy. We still need the SEC and the FTC to level the playing field continuously. It can't be done just once. Every time it's tilted, we have to fix it. And we also have experimented with some forms of public ownership. I'm not going to advocate for socialism overall, but in certain places it actually works. In the military, it's socialist. Let's be real. The military is a socialist institution. In other countries, healthcare is public. Education is public in many places. The justice system is public in many places, in all places, hopefully. And big infrastructure projects are public works. These are places where it works because the profit motive of private companies takes so much money out of the system that they become less efficient than whatever bureaucracy we might add from government. Direct redistribution of wealth also is not something we like. It feels really unfair. These are my toys, don't take them away. I feel like I earned it. And so a lot of people take that attitude, but we also have seen that deep centralization of wealth and power is a tad problematic as well. Just not enough people see that. What we want is a new set of rules. Just like Elizabeth Maggie tried to make a new set of rules for the game around land, around property, we can be thinking about new rules for how we do things, and especially in the digital world. This is something we get to define because it's all new. So what we might propose is a new set of rules with no IP landlords. The digital commons is like air or water or what the Georgists want land to be, that hopefully most creators should actually make a decent living. Let's give up on the idea of everybody having the potential to make $100 million, because not everybody can make $100 million. But there's enough money out there that everybody can make a decent living. And if we focus on making sure people get to do what they love, then we're going to be all set. We should move beyond the Creative Commons, because the Creative Commons is a way of giving up some of your inherent copyrights, but it doesn't handle the monetization itself. We need to figure out how to actually make sure that people can make a living here. And as I'm going to talk a lot about, we need to move beyond artificial scarcity and owning IP. Because the fundamental goal here is that prosperity should not be scarce. Now comes Star Trek. Okay, so Star Trek was a protopian vision of the future in which we're post-scarcity and post-money, at least for the Federation. You work on your life's passions. Sentient AI is bad. We don't like it. All the replicators make food, clothing, tools, whatever we need, we can fashion for free in a replicator. But what about the beings living outside the Federation? That question was addressed very much in the spin-off Deep Space Nine. And in that series, we started learning we needed a new kind of money, the writers did, because if you could just replicate cash or any other kind of money, then everybody in the Federation would be ridiculously wealthy outside the Federation. That's not a good thing. So they invented this idea of latinum, gold-pressed latinum, which takes as much energy to create as it's worth. So now this has become their stablecoin in a sense. They have effectively invented Bitcoin to solve a plot hole. That's what happened. But they didn't make it deflationary. I think it's pretty important to figure that out. So this is a vision of the future. And even in that vision of the future, they needed something like Bitcoin in order to make the stories move ahead. But they could have thought a little harder about it, because the internet is very much like replicators in that it's a giant copy machine. It's completely free to copy. And it's as if we've invented replicators already digitally and then decided to make everything scarce and expensive again. Like, what's wrong with us? So let's talk about Web3. And I want to be careful here that there's many good things in Web3. There are many people who are dogmatic and think it's the future of everything. And there's many people who think it's all scam. I'm in the middle. I think there's good things and I think there's a lot of bad things. And we need to be really clear about which is which. Why are we excited first? Well, decentralization promises to disempower the giant corporations who have way too much power. We also, many of us feel the government has way too much power over us individually, shouldn't be regulating our bodies, etc. What about owning our stuff? There's a lot of people who feel like, they want to earn stuff and buy stuff and be able to take it with them freely. The creator economy is something where we say anybody should be able to make and sell things without intermediaries. It should be easy. Artists, musicians, all creators should be able to monetize their work, and the value of their work is the value of their work. Whatever people think it's worth is going to be what it is. So that's a much better world than what we have. But we've made a few mistakes along the way. So blockchain is not all bad, but it's made a big mistake. It's built on this idea of scarcity by design. And anytime you have a limited supply in economics and an unlimited demand, you basically get gouging. And the gas fees on Ethereum is a perfect example of gouging. In a good economic system, when prices go up, it would encourage greater production of whatever limited resource you have. But in the case of Ethereum, all it does is encourage you to go to other blockchains. It does not actually create more capacity in the giant virtual computer that is Ethereum. So it's a form of gouging. Let's just be real about this. Artificial scarcity is inherently deflationary, another economic term. If inflation is bad, deflation is also bad. Deflationary means that it's not a good currency. People want to hold it, they don't want to spend it because it's more of an asset. It's going to be worth more if you hold it versus spend it. That plus the idea that there's no inherent value, and a lot of people will come in and say, well, fiat currency has no inherent value too. True, but it's used so much that it effectively has an inherent value. It's used constantly, and at this point, no digital currency is used very much like currency, and so it's inherently unstable. There's nothing holding it up. And if it's a currency, that means it needs to circulate. It needs to not be deflationary. It needs to be stable. And most of the stable coins that we've seen so far have had major problems. We're not there yet. Linden dollars are still the best example of a stable coin because it was regulated like the Fed. It was actively managed to stay very stable with the dollar. So there are good things about blockchain as well. Public distributed ledgers are great for public records where no one entity should control the records, but be really careful about putting anything private. Even if you encrypt it, all encryption today will be cracked within a few years, guaranteed. Imagine what happens with spam when everybody can see the record of what you've bought, where it goes. Every concert or piece of art or anything you bought is now available to people to spam you with more similar things that may not be as good. I don't want that world. I hope you don't want that world. So don't put your stuff out there in public unless you want it to be public. There's a way of dealing with this. It's called distributed identity. It preserves privacy. It's part of Web3. So we need a way for people to have persistent identities that prevent third-party data collection and tracking and exploitation. So look into verifiable credentials and distributed IDs. They don't require blockchains, and it's a way of answering a question like, is a person old enough to see this, or are someone authorized to see this without giving away your data? Keep your data safe. Okay. Let's talk about virtual property for a second. I don't give financial advice, but if you ask me, this is one of the stupidest things to put your money into. What you're basically doing is staking an empty place and waiting for it to become valuable. It's not, because you don't know what the future traffic is going to be. The only reason it will be valuable is if there's lots of traffic in the future. But land, moreover, should be more like a commons, like air and water and space, especially in the digital realm where it's unlimited. And the Georgists had a pretty good take on this. So let's apply the Second Life and Georgist idea of land, saying we can rent it, we can use it, but let's not own it. Really what matters is value creation. Are we creating value? If we are, it takes literal acts of creation, not squatting. So I believe fully that professional creators should make a living. And we're talking about the hot topic of NFTs. A lot of people love them. Many people hate them at this point. But I'm going to talk about it for just a second because of the fact that NFTs are locking us into this artificial scarcity model, which causes inflated hype, fear, or in some cases joy of missing out. Bubbles go all the way back to tulips in the 1600s. There have been many bubbles. Beanie Babies was a bubble. It's a winner-take-all scenario, and whoever's left holding the bag when the bubble bursts is going to lose a lot of money. That's also called the greater fool fraud, which is not something I think we all want to participate in. Let's, if we're going to be ethical, let's not go into those things, especially when we know that's what's going to happen. So if we want to make NFTs non-cringeable, let's remember that it's not the NFT itself, it's the contract. When you bought the NFT, the contract is what conferred whatever rights you bought. And some NFT sales don't confer any rights. Some don't confer the key rights like ownership right now. Possessing a token doesn't mean anything. It's all about what contractual rights were transferred to you. So trade them if you want. Own Beanie Babies if you want. No, nobody cares. But we have to decide if we're going to make a living as creators, or do we want to keep buying lottery tickets and building a system which only a few people win? Here's a graph to demonstrate that idea. This is a made-up graph, but it really visualizes what we really want versus what we have. In the marketplace of scarcity, there are a few big winners. A few people can make a living as well, but most people don't, and it does not support a lot of creators because everything goes to those winners. But in a marketplace of abundance, we support many more creators, not all, because creators also have to make stuff that people want. But it allows people to make a living and to do the things they love for a living. And that's much more important. So what we want is a marketplace of abundance. Well, let's talk about gaming for profit, whatever you want to call it. Well, one of the problems here is that mining for virtual gold, it doesn't create new value. It was already created. The gold is there. It's abundant. It's just being held back. It's not new. You didn't really do anything to create that value. The company is just bribing you to play their game. And for many companies, the amount they give out is only a small fraction of what they take in. They can never give out more than they take in. That's business, right? They're not going to go out of business for your sake. And it really depends on the business model. Even if you think it's free money, like in an ad-driven model, oh, it's free. The money comes from the advertisers. No, you're paying for that. You're paying for that in the products that you buy that are marked up 15 to 30% to pay for the advertising, to pay the companies who have the ad tech model, and giving you back a little bit of your own money. That doesn't add up. What we should focus on is helping to create and properly value new ideas. A lot of us are here for the decentralization. That's all good. The internet was built to be decentralized. It's also meant to stop the giants from gobbling us up. But we got to be really careful here. If you're part of a DAO or any other system where it's one share, one vote, that's called plutocracy. That's not democracy, because somebody can accumulate multiple shares. They can get more votes. They get more say. That leads to re-centralization. That's the exact opposite of what we want. We don't want decentralization simply to recongeal in someone else's pocket. What we want is democratization with strong checks and balances. And that means one person, one vote. Everyone is represented equally. And there's a question of who's going to enforce these rules. Decentralization is often just a code word for deregulation by the libertarians. Smart contracts are there to prevent cheating, but they honestly don't really work yet. They don't handle the reality of externalities or things that they can't see within the system. They only handle entities or quantities within the system, and they don't handle bugs very well. There's already been examples of smart contracts that could pay out way more money than they were supposed to based on program error. And how do you fix it? It's already locked in stone. The government is often the last place to turn to fix bad actors, but we don't really want to disempower the government. What we want is to restrain the government when it overacts. We want the checks and balances. So democratization fundamentally means the redistribution of power, or the distribution of power to the people, not less power overall. From this whole section, what I want you to take away is the problem with artificial scarcity is that prosperity shouldn't be scarce. So now let's talk about what else we can do. Well, let's focus on fostering abundance. So what if we were to all be creating unique and valued work? What if we focused on that? And imagine for a second the system didn't worry about DRM or even copyright. It allowed other people to copy, build, and share widely, but it tracks who creates each unique idea. It keeps track of it in the cloud. We make it super easy to find and reuse other people's content, but this time with credit. No more credit stealing. If you use someone's idea, they're going to get credit for it automatically in the system we design. When someone takes our idea and mashes it up and makes something new, we also get some credit, not all credit, because they did some work too. And when someone makes money with our ideas, we also get some of the money. If they did new work, if they just make money with our ideas and did no work, we should get way more of that money. But let's also not cut out the middlemen. Today, the problem with the middlemen is they're overly greedy and they take the giant cut of the work and they only give the artists a small amount. But we can build a system in which the marketers and the influencers do get a cut. It's just a fair cut, okay? They do add value. They make sure that the right people find the work. Not everybody should have to be a marketer, but we should value that properly and not let the gatekeepers control everything. So here's the idea. So we start with 3 creators who all influenced each other. One person had an idea, another person had a similar idea and built on it. There's 3 ideas out there. Someone else comes along, or 3 new people come along, and they mash up these ideas in 3 different ways. They're all interesting, but none of them is really taking off. So a smart person comes along, sees all these things and says, I have an idea. Let me take a little bit of each one of those things and make something that's an amalgam of all those things. That person has added some value to this by creating something relatively new, not completely new. So now they take it and they put it out in a store. And there's a couple of people who show up, they like it. It's doing pretty well, but it could do even better. So they decide to put it out there for free to let even more people see it. And now there's money flowing and there's credit flowing. And some of the theory here is that the more people that see it, the more the people that are going to be willing to pay something for it later. So the store is not the end place. The internet, the metaverse, is the end place that everybody gets to see it. And we're going to figure out now how to take that money and how to take that credit and proportionately flow it back to the people who deserve it fairly for their contributions. So each of those people in the chain, the idea person, the store, the influencer, marketer, the mashers, the original creators, they all deserve a piece of that pie. It has to add up to 100%, but we can do it fairly. And everybody can make something as long as there's new money flowing into the system. So what does this require? Well, it requires tracking the ideas and creations in the wild. That's hard, but we have some positive examples already. GitHub tracks all the changes a group of people make to code across many authors and branches. So it's already pretty good at figuring out who did what. It just doesn't know how to value it yet. NVIDIA Omniverse also does a similar thing for 3D content. And their goal right now is real-time collaboration. So they're sharing pieces of models. Whatever you change gets reflected out to everybody else who's working on the same thing. And that's a pretty good start to being able to value the changes in digital 3D content. So now what we need to do is figure out how to fairly value the individual contributions. It's hard, but we know it has to add up to 100%. We have that constraint. And we know the decision-making has to be transparent. People should see how and why they got 2% of something. But the reason they got 2% should be totally explainable, automated, and people should be able to appeal that process. And over the long term, they're going to get more this time, less this time. It has to be accepted as a fairly accurate reflection. We have to address the culture of ownership. It's not so much about ownership, but about rights, about who's allowed to do what and what they're allowed to do with it. And there's still going to be cases where people don't want their content mashed up. People may not want their brand messed up in a way that is going to devalue the brand. And they have a right to say that. That's okay. But we have to figure out how to properly measure added value, figure out how to flow these payments efficiently and the credit efficiently, and most importantly, don't blow it up like a bubble. We have to grow it slowly so that creators can make a living and nobody gets these $29 billion payouts in the news, which cause tremendous hype like another gold rush. So is this hard? Is it harder than designing a new decentralized digital currency? I don't think so. I think it's hard. But is it harder than replacing a fiat currency in a major country? Is it harder than physically scanning the irises of 8 billion people? I think if you put it in context, it's not the hardest problem people have proposed solving with Web3. So we have to decide now, which set of rules do we really want to win? We have the monopolist rules, and we have the rules that are going to benefit the greatest number of people, right? We go back to this idea that prosperity shouldn't be scarce. I think you know what my answer is. Thank you for listening to my talk on fostering abundance.